Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me today is one of our regular Critical Issues team members, Denise Keel, on my right. Denise is a professor of political science at Western Michigan University. She also works with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability on campus, and she serves as the chair of the WMU Climate Change Working Group. So she's a rather busy person some days. We also have a very special guest with us today, Dr. David Benac, who's a professor in the History Department at Western Michigan University. And he's going to be with us to talk about the upcoming Earth Day here in Kalamazoo. Don Cooney, by the way, is off on assignment, as they say, in the media business, right? So unfortunately, Don could not be with us. David, we want you to talk about the Earth Day coming up on April 20th. But before we get to the specifics of this year's Earth Day, I thought it might be good to get a little bit of historical perspective on Earth Day. You're a history professor, so we're going to put you to work and give us a little bit of history of Earth Day.
Sure, thanks. This is really exciting for me because Earth Day at its roots is a grassroots event. It's intended to encourage people to take an active role. And that's really the kind of thing that I look at in my research. And the original Earth Day also is interesting for us here because it was a Midwestern phenomenon. You know, the creator of Earth Day was Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin. The very first Earth Day action that took place was a teach-in at University of Michigan. So we are well situated here. If you go on YouTube and search for Earth Day 1970, you'll find the NBC News broadcast for it. And one of the things that I always show in class is there's a clip of NBC News in Albion.
Really?
And they have the kids from Albion cleaning up the riverbank. And yeah, that to me is what Earth Day is about. You know, it's, the first one was in 1970, which makes 2019 the 49th year. So we'll have a really big event next year, but we'll have a big event this year as well. And it started because post-World War II, the United States and the world was facing environmental threats that we'd never seen, you know, between nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, between synthetic pesticides and chemicals of all different types that we'd never known of, and all the other types of pollution that we'd never seen. And so the Earth action of the 1970s, a lot of it was environmental health related. And it's really about getting people involved, letting everyone know that yes, we individually can't solve all the problems and we can't solve maybe the biggest problems, but every single person needs to be involved, needs to take a part. And it doesn't have to be about sacrifice. It can be about building community and finding friends and doing, you know, things where you can participate and, yeah, do something fun, and that's what Earth Day to me is about.
Yeah. You mentioned atomic radiation because that was a huge concern with the atmospheric testing of atomic bombs and nuclear weapons in the post-war period. There was great concern, a lot of activity, and eventually, of course, we succeeded in banning atmospheric testing of those weapons.
One of the things that most people don't recognize is the group Greenpeace.
That's right.
Now, Greenpeace did not start as an environmental organization.
Right.
They started as an anti-nuclear organization and were largely responsible for ending atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons.
It's really important to note that the Earth Day and those original activists was a peace movement, as you're sort of saying, right? And the environment came along at that same time, and the pictures from the moon, from space came back, right? And we had this unifying force of we're all on one Earth and we're sort of in this together. So I think we'll pick up a bit later this idea that youth leading a movement might be an important thing in American democracy, right? That is, you know, how we tend to think of and romanticize possibly the 60s, but definitely the first Earth Day, which was successful in kicking off, as you, David, well knows, we call it the environmental decade. We passed almost all of our major environmental legislation post-Earth Day for between 1970 and 1980. So these things can make a huge difference, and I love the activism reasons for what you were talking about, why this started, right?
And I think it's important to give credit to Rachel Carson.
Agreed.
Because with her book in 1962, Silent Spring,
Yeah.
just a tremendously important a book about the environmental issues and what we call impact science.
That's right.
The fact that
Right.
science was now beginning to demonstrate to us some of the negative things that were coming
Right.
out of the Industrial Revolution
That's
and
right.
everything else that was happening. So, plus we had some other environmental disasters. I mean, 50 years ago this
That's
year,
right.
we had the oil spill in Santa Barbara,
That's right.
which led to a classic sociological article,
Yeah.
Oil in Santa Barbara and Power in America,
There you go.
an analysis of how that oil spill and
Yeah.
everything that surrounded it sort of gave us a peek at how power really operates in the United States and the way corporations and the government kind of work together and silence the media and keep important issues off the agenda. So it was a very insightful article. And then also in 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught
That's
fire
right. That's right.
near Cleveland, Ohio.
Yes.
And so these were things sort of predating the first Earth Day. But again, the 60s were that decade where we were becoming more and more concerned. And then, of course,
Right.
following Earth Day, we get all the legislation
That's
that
right.
passes. So very good.
Well, I think it's a good point to re-recognize that time period and how what we might today call interlocking crises, right? It's the peace movement, it's the environment, it's the
Right.
it was all of these sort of things coming together and realizing that there was a common cause, a common agenda, and that again, you know, that generation could maybe do something about it, right? So
What a novel idea.
who knew?
Well, I think could do something about it, I think, is a really important phrase.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the youth comes in. If you look at any of the really important social or cultural or even political movements in our history, it's almost always led by the youth, whether it's women's rights, anti-war, environment, or even, you know, to be nonpartisan, if you look at the conservative revolution, you know,
right.
that was led by young conservatives as well. So we have to have youth involved, and when they are, we can really change things.
I would also like to point out that the co-chair of the first Earth Day was a Republican.
Yes.
Yes.
Republican Congressman Pete McCloskey
Yes.
from California. And so this was a time when a Republican
That's
could back an environmental issue, right?
Yeah, I mean-
And I think it's some measure of how far the current Republican Party has moved and departed from some of the concerns and issues that it was concerned with 50 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent point, right? Nixon is in office, creates the Environmental Protection Agency, a Republican adds to government,
Yeah,
right? All
yeah.
of this regulation, that's before it became such a bipartisan, nonpartisan.
Right, so in the 70s, environmental ideas were not, they were just completely not affiliated with partisanship.
Right.
And you can even, I think that environmentalism is in a way inherently conservative
Yeah.
because we're trying to keep what we have, hold on to it. And if you are involved in business or if you're involved in politics or city planning, you have a resource at your disposal.
Right.
It just seems to me to shepherd and to care for that resource so you can continue to use it going forward. It just seems like a wise policy.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Conserve America
Right.
is
Yeah.
one of the big conservative base, and you know they're in Sturgis, Michigan, is where their president lives and resides and runs that whole operation.
didn't know that.
Yep. So the Michigan connection is strong here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn our attention to 2019.
Yes.
Sure.
What do you got planned?
I think we want to give a shout out to our good friend Alan Webb,
Yes.
who's been one of the major forces behind reviving Earth Day in
Right.
Kalamazoo, because
Yes.
I think it had sort of lapsed that we
That's
did
right.
not have any specific events, at least
Yep.
not down in Bronson Park,
Right.
not anything big. But a couple of years ago, Alan kind of got the ball rolling again, and I know you guys have a great committee that works on this. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about Earth Day 2019.
Yeah, so where it came from is when I moved back to Michigan, I was in Kalamazoo, and Alan and I have talked about this quite a bit. I thought it was really weird that Kalamazoo doesn't have an Earth Day. Yeah, because it's kind of an Earth Day type of a town. So Alan and I and a handful of other people got together and put the first one together. This will be our third year running it downtown in Bronson Park. And just to give full credit to the Kalamazoo Nature Center. Kalamazoo Nature Center has been running an Earth Day, a very wonderful event for a very long time, continuously. So we're not saying that there's never been Earth Day in the Kalamazoo area. It just hasn't been downtown. And we're working closely with the Nature Center because we see what we're doing as complementary rather than competitive. And we brought Kalamazoo's Downtown Earth Day back. And like you said, there has been Earth Day in downtown in the past. It seems to ebb and flow, and we've been at a period where it's been gone for a while. This year we have continued to refine what we've been doing. We have about 70 different community partners that will be having booths to take part. Got a lot of different sponsors who've helped us raise the money to make this happen. We are continuing to have the artwork installation. We've used a couple times, the Walk into the Climate Future. And then we are adding a artwork installation about the Green New Deal. I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. And then we also have one of our most successful parts is the kids area. And we have just a really fantastic group of people with kids activities to really make it interactive and fun and learn through doing. And we're doing everything that we've got. We're doing shorter speeches from the stage this year, because we want people to be engaged and excited and not have to stand or sit through a 15-minute talk. So we'll have those shortened down. We'll have a lot of people up there, and we are nonpartisan. We have invited all the political figures from the area to see who wants to participate. We are pushing environmental conservation and environmental responsibility, but not political agendas. And they do, as we've said, they kind of run together today, but not necessarily. And that's one of the ways that we distinguish what we do and how we work with the Nature Center. The Nature Center does like nature education and hands-on in that regard. We at the downtown group try to bring community together and talk more about activism and the issues at stake and what every community group and individuals can do to make a difference.
Talk to, I know there's 101,000 acts of green is one of the themes this year. Tell folks what they could do about that or how to get involved and what's that about?
Yeah, so what we try to do every year is have a different theme. This last year was protect our water. The first year was make a promise to the earth. And this year it's 101,000 acts of green. And we actually stole the idea from the Chinese. So they were intellectual property. And in China, they have a thing they're calling billion acts of green. We can't really do a billion. But we chose 101,000 because there's 101,000 households in Kalamazoo County. And our idea is an act of green is any organized activity in favor of sustainability or the earth, whether it is a book club, an invited speaker, a town hall, a park cleanup, helping replace light bulbs, carpooling, planting a tree, taking care of a wildflower garden, anything. And we are doing our very best to publicize those and help people promote and organize what they're doing, whether they're an existing organization or just a family. If you and your family want to do a beach cleanup, put it on the site and we'll help get people there. And the idea is that between now and Earth Day 2020, we will have done 101,000 acts of green for Kalamazoo County in the area.
That's a great, I really like, again, bringing it home to the original idea of Earth Day, this idea of action, and that we could all take some personal action, forget the government every once in a while, right? And just do what you know and think is right for yourself. So you go onto the Kalamazoo Nature Center's website, and you can find a lot of this information and the sponsors, and you might still be able to even be a sponsor.
We can take sponsors still right up to the day of, but we have all of our print material is already in place, so sponsors at this point won't get on the print material.
The logos wouldn't get on or anything.
But anybody who still wants to take part and have a booth, they can sign up for that at any point. And if you just Google Bronson Park Earth Day, it'll come right up. Or like I said, you can go to the Kalamazoo Nature Center or find us on Facebook. We're really looking to get people involved. And the past couple years, we've tried to do as much outreach as we could, but it was really about the festival and the education opportunities at the festival. This year, we're trying to expand what we're doing, have the festival be a celebration of what we're all doing to make this a more sustainable community.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you to the committee for the work. I know just an example of how dedicated these folks are. You meet at 8 a.m. on Friday morning.
Yes, we do.
Bi-weekly. So just so folks know, right? There's a really dedicated group of folks making it happen.
And
you know,
to make that even more, in fact, a lot of the people who are most helpful are students.
That's right.
So we have a really great group of students. We've got some people from the community, some faculty, some staff from the university. So we have 20 to 30 people in the room every Friday at 8 a.m. and a bunch of them are students. If you can get students to show up at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, you're doing something.
That's why I say you're doing something right there, and having 70 sponsors this year, and yeah, it's fantastic. So that's noon to 5 in Bronson Park, Saturday, April 20th.
Correct. It is the day before Easter. It is April 20th. That's not the actual Earth Day. Earth Day itself, I believe, falls on Tuesday.
It's the 22nd is the official day. So
we're using the Saturday immediately before as a way to, so people will have the time off. They can bring their kids down, get something to eat. We're going to have food vendors and just have a good time.
Love it. Love it.
The climate change issue certainly is,
yes.
I mean, we're looking very broadly at the environment and actions for sustainability, but climate change is sort of front and center, I think, in terms of the thinking of the committee and the events the last couple of years.
Yeah, so we have made, in the past couple of years, climate change has been one of our biggest emphases. The first year, that was really our biggest thing. The second year, we were really trying to focus primarily on water, but you can't really talk about environmental issues and not talk about the climate. And this year, we don't have an issue at the heart of things. It's more about taking action. But yeah, we are going to be doing a lot about climate change. It's just the evidence. Every day, there's something more, and it's just irresponsible to try to deny it at this point. And we need to take action.
You're doing an installation this year at Earth Day on the Green New Deal.
Correct.
Sort of like, so if folks aren't familiar, there was an installation, Walk into the Climate Future, which an artist did, and there are these great 14 by 12, panels of different 1 degree, 2 degree, all the way up to 6 degree, and the things you can sort of expect. They're very powerful. They were utilized at the climate strike that was held by Western students a few weeks ago now, and that's one of the more powerful images. So trying to talk about the Green New Deal, though, in a similar fashion, do we want to move on, and how would one summarize the Green New Deal into an artistic or educational at this point, and sort of where things are at with that? Do you know what that's going to look like, or what you're trying to do?
We've looked over the sketches, so we actually have the same artist who's working with us again. And so we will have the Walk into the Climate Future installation will be there as well. So there's going to be more artwork this year. But what we did working with the artist was take the initial or the actual resolution that was introduced into Congress, and we started from that, and then we looked at different people who've explained it and how they put it together, and then we took, here are the main points, and then here are some of the key issues for how those points can be put into policy. And we talked with the artists about how to represent that in graphic form.
I think that would be really helpful. Most of my students were kind of surprised. It's only a 14-page resolution. You too could read this resolution. It's not, this 100, 200-page behemoth thing that we're really talking about. We talked about it a little bit last time. Should we try to summarize what it is again?
Sure. Let's try.
Should we make Dave do that this time instead of me?
Let me just first point out that there have actually been some economists who've been talking about a Green New Deal for quite some time. I think Robert Pollin is one of the economists who has an excellent book on green economy, and he's been talking about this. But in the political realm, it's been relatively recently that people are starting to advocate for a Green New Deal. And of course, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the newest members of Congress, and a lot of the freshmen who've come into the Congress this time, the Democrats that were elected last November, have been getting behind trying to push the Democratic Party, to push the party leadership to set up a committee. A Green New Deal committee was the first idea. And then later, when the new Congress actually met, AOC, as we call her, and Senator Ed Markey put together, introduced a resolution for a Green New Deal. So that was introduced back in January. And David, you want to kind of fill us in? What is the Green New Deal resolution all about? What are some of the highlights of it?
I would argue that it's relatively easy to explain. People don't recognize how simple it is, really. And that is, the principle is that the United States currently faces three crises. One is the crisis of climate change. The second is the crisis of economic inequality. And then the third is the crisis of social justice.
Right.
And the Green New Deal is like the original New Deal in that it's not a single policy fix that's supposed to solve everything. What it is intended to do is create a set of policies that recognize that we have these three interlocking crises,
Right.
and we can't really solve one without addressing the other. And if you want to think about it from a perspective of efficiency, if you have three problems to solve at the same time, why not try to find something that works on solving all three instead of solving one and then trying to solve the second and then trying to solve the third? So I argue it's that simple. We have three major problems, and how can we come up with a suite of policies that will help us solve those problems?
Right. It's nice to have a positive kind of policy idea that we could solve and tackle the climate change problem, that is a way to increase jobs, right? Because if we actually make the sort of transitions that we need to in renewable energy, those are new jobs that are then available, right? And so it sort of connects the dots close together. And then, of course, as we know, the folks who are going to be hit the hardest by climate change impacts are our most vulnerable populations. So what are we doing with our infrastructure, with workers' rights, to be able to bring those folks into the equation? And that's the equality part of this. So absolutely, it's that's why it's called the Green New Deal, right? Modeled after our original New Deal that brought together similar crises, and now it's green because the focus is to, if you solve the climate crisis, you might just solve a lot of other problems. The cartoon that's still on my door is, so what if this thing is a hoax and we created a whole better world for ourselves? It's sort of for nothing, for no reason. It has that sort of ring to it. We should remind folks this is a resolution.
Correct.
Right? This is not, it was not supposed to be the detailed legislative, policy line by line. This was do you recognize these crises? Do you recognize how they go together? And kind of, are you with us? Is this something that we need to be focusing on the agenda? So,
and a framework then within which you can begin to address
that's right.
These different things. And again, I just want to point out the very deliberate choice of New Deal,
yes.
right?
Yes.
The Green New Deal. And so, again, hearkening back, as you said, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Great Depression, and the serious crisis the country faced at that point, and Roosevelt's efforts to begin to address the effects of the Great Depression. And it wasn't just one act or one legislative enactment, but it was a whole series of policies over a period of time that were attempted. And at that point, I think it's important to point out an encouragement for the role of government. What can government do to address these things? Because up to that point, the United States did not really have a very strong or active role for government to play. We were still ideologically very conservative in that sense. And so the idea that government can play a positive role, that government can improve people's lives, and in fact, government has to take the lead in this situation because the free market economy has collapsed at this point, and so government has to step in and play a positive role. And of course, we've moved very far from that idea. That idea that government can be a positive force has been relentlessly attacked for a long period of time. Of course, it was very controversial even in FDR's day, but the relentless attack on government. And then I'm always reminded of Christian Parente's little article, climate change will make you love big government.
That's right.
Because again, if we're looking at the climate crisis, there really has to be a role for government to play. We're not going to be able to deal with the climate crisis unless we see government take positive steps to help us address that crisis. And again, by doing that, we address these other cascading problems as well.
And so I just want to put in like how that works as a precedent, the New Deal. If we look at just a selection of things that the New Deal did, you had the National Labor Relations Act, which tried to balance the relationship between labor and employers to make better paying jobs and an economy that was stable. You had the Works Progress Administration, which put a lot of people to work, but it also looked at people with special skills. So it employed artists, and if you go into any post office in the country and you see those beautiful murals, those were painted by Works Progress Administration artists. If you look at the Civilian Conservation Corps, that was stabilizing the natural environment as well as taking unemployed young men out of cities and putting them into a productive environment. And you can also look at the Agricultural Adjustment Act.
That's right.
It was designed to reduce the overconsumption of produce while at the same time stabilizing the market that farmers had so that they could make a living wage. All those things are part of the New Deal. They're all drastically different.
Right.
And that's why the Green New Deal plays on that precedent, because we need to have a suite of policies that are very broad-ranging, that look like they might be different, but they do all intersect, and they all look at those three basic crises.
It's a great point, because the criticism of the Green New Deal is that, well, these are all big ideas that are not connected to each other. And again, the idea is is this a framing that we will accept or not, right? And of course, the original New Deal met lots of skeptics and lots of opposition in the first place as well. So I don't think it's a big surprise, and I think it's healthy to continue to have the conversation of the role of government, right? That is the quintessential question here. But this idea that these fears of these are problems that are too big or that don't go together will push us into socialism, or it's interesting to me because the argument is you can't have it both ways. I sometimes wonder, are we socialist or are we elitist in wanting the Green New Deal, right? Has been the sort of two different things and how are we going to pay for it, right? That this is this vast investment, though, much like the original New Deal was in people and places to get the country working together. Right?
We can't afford not to pay for it, is what it comes down to.
Yep.
If we don't take these type of drastic steps, our economy right now seems very robust, but it's like a Gilded Age economy where it's very shallow in terms of who is seeing the benefits. And we need to make sure that those benefits spread out across the entire population in a way that's sustainable, so that we can have an economy that benefits everyone and continues to function properly.
Right.
And I think one of the key points of the Green New Deal, it's aimed primarily at dealing with the issue of climate change, because we have to drastically reduce carbon emissions, right? So part of the Green New Deal is to get to zero net emissions by 2040?
2040 is the goal in the Green New Deal. Yep.
Yeah. So that's first and foremost. But in terms of doing that, we can also create jobs.
That's exactly right.
We can create a lot of really great jobs, because there's going to have to be a transition away from fossil fuels toward clean, renewable energy, building a new infrastructure. And so part of this is to create a whole lot of really good jobs, right?
That's right.
And also perhaps support unions, right? As we move forward and create new jobs, build a new infrastructure, can support working families, we can support unions. And so again, that seems to be one of the positive steps. When some of the critics look at the Green New Deal, they're emphasizing the cost of it, but without ever looking at the benefits, right? We've talked about this before, that when conservatives do a cost-benefit analysis about government programs, they always add up the cost, but they never look at the benefits, right? And the benefits here are enormous, right?
Right. Even in the avoided harms, right? We're expecting our government, again, Y Parente says climate change will make you love big government. We're expecting a government to bail us out of hurricanes and wildfires and build seawalls. Well, this is a way to do that and achieve that kind of security, right? Again, Earth Day and these things come out of a peace movement, right? And peace not just to each other, but to our actual earth as well, right? So that's very interesting to me. And I would also add, a lot of this push is from the Sunrise Movement, which is the organization of youth, which is technically defined 18 to 29. So if you were wondering what category you fell into, that's how we define it for voting as well. Right, this is a nationwide movement that is focused on youth becoming knowledgeable and taking action on climate change and taking political action. In particular, they've ran a very successful campaign for the midterm election cycle to take the pledge of no fossil fuel money for candidates and to really promote those candidates and who are we electing and what is this belief system and kind of, again, are you with us or not? And they are the driving force behind the Green New Deal and the social activism side of things as well. So it's really important to see this robust, powerful youth movement supporting these ideas and arguing that we will hold our elected officials accountable on this issue and we will vote on this particular issue, right? Yeah.
How are we going to pay for this?
So,
Geez, there's no money left, right?
It's only 93 trillion. We spend, you and I have talked, don't get Ron started on the military budget, right?
But even the number, the 93 trillion, is taken from a report, which then the publishers of that report later said that that's not the number they used.
That's right.
So there is no number. It would be literally impossible to come up with a price tag for a resolution that doesn't actually have any set policies.
That's right.
So I think we have to we have to reframe it and think of what is the cost of not taking action, and who pays the cost of things such as the high rate of asthma for people who live near highways.
Right.
When we switch to a transportation system that's primarily electric cars, you will no longer get asthma because you live next to a highway.
Right.
Think about what that saves for people who live in those communities.
That's right.
So the cost of not taking action is much greater than the cost of taking action.
And again, there's money there, right?
That's right.
We find money when we want to build
banks.
up the Pentagon,
Build a
or
wall.
we want to build a wall, or whatever we want.
That's right.
We
It's about
find money,
priorities, right? This is
Correct.
a values statement, is how I like to look at the Green New Deal. Again, it's a resolution of, it's not the specific legislation yet. I think that's a really valid point. How would we do a cost benefit on something that doesn't actually propose specific legislation? That's not the point. This is a statement of values and principles and priorities and vision, right? And it's been, I think, really, especially the left has been waiting for a chance to say, no, we have a vision and we have a positive vision of how we could move America forward on these. Now, the politics, of course, are a little different than the policy.
Sure.
We did have a vote.
Well.
Do you want to talk? Well, before that, because you mentioned the politics versus the policy, and you go back to Sunrise, and the politics of this is dependent upon politicians feeling that it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And in no slight to any of our elected representatives, but politicians are not leaders. Politicians follow pressure.
Right.
And we live in a world right now where that pressure is primarily exerted by people with money.
Yep.
And if we transform that, like you were talking earlier about the 60s, if we transform that pressure into a grassroots pressure of citizen activism, the politics of this will change, which will make it safe for politicians to change the policy.
That's right. Without that pressure, right? Politicians need that pressure, and I don't know that they're feeling enough of it. Right, is why we're seeing these age-old tropes and socialism and big government questions sort of come out, because there's not the safe place of enough pressure out there. Now, as I like to remind my elected official friends, 40% of the electorate in 2020 will be in that youth category. And they do care about this issue. Now, whether or not we can get them out to vote, that remains to be the question. Is it actually salient enough that a politician will feel like the pressure is there to move this? Because right now they don't. Most of them don't.
For political figures who are able to engage with that younger demographic And the most effective ways to engage with that group is to talk about the issues they care about.
That's right.
And every single study I have seen,
right.
environmental issues is always within the top 3 for younger Americans. So if you can get out there and talk about how you're going to promote a safer, more sustainable, more healthy and equitable environment, then younger Americans will feel a reason to come out and vote, and that will be the difference.
That political pressure is extremely important, and of course right now, the way the system is structured, that pressure is coming from corporations, it's coming from the fossil fuel industry, it's coming from the wealthy stakeholders.
That's right.
And that's why we see, I mean, there's a lot of money here.
Oh my
There's a lot of money that's given to the fossil fuel industry as subsidies. Now, why the fossil fuel industry is the most profitable industry in history, right? And yet we're still subsidizing, our tax money is still subsidizing this industry that's destroying the climate. I mean, David Wallace Wells in his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, which I think would like to promote if we get a chance. But in here, he points out that it's about $5 trillion worldwide.
That's right.
$5 trillion worldwide that's being used to subsidize the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
And that would, they're on cue, they've got it up on the screen.
We did an event on the true cost of carbon, and this is the huge point. Like one of the easiest places to start would be to end subsidies for fossil fuels. Right there's $5 trillion, right?
Why are we still subsidizing an industry that is creating an uninhabitable Earth, right?
That's right.
And again, the Pentagon budget, we know that about $1 trillion, I mean, if you add everything in that's actually spent on military related, we spend $1 trillion a year on the military. And most of that is wasted. It's not necessary for any rational defense needs. It's to sustain an empire of bases around the world and to intervene illegally and immorally in a variety of places around the world. We don't need to spend that amount of money to be safe and to have defense, right?
That's right.
And think about the tax break that the Trump and the Republicans ran through. Again, gave away trillions of dollars.
That's right. It's about priorities again.
To those who already have enormous wealth and resources. So to cry poor, oh, this is going to cost so much money. Well, you know, again, they're shoveling boatloads of money at things that we disagree with and that we think are destructive in a lot of ways, but destructive to the environment. And so again, this is a matter of values, this is a matter of priorities. And so that political pressure has to be directed at Congress to say, stop doing these destructive things, begin to do these positive.
And it's David's point of economic equality. That's what we're really also asking for, is to not be beholden to moneyed special interests. That, no, the electorate, that the youth, the folks who are going to have to live with this problem could actually
And
have a say.
Going back to activism, if we look at, say, 1969, when Nixon expanded bombing into Cambodia, the streets of America erupted into protests, and that was a big part of the reason why the United States left the war in Vietnam. But now we have undeclared, unsupported, illegal incursions with drone strikes and other type of attacks in countries all over the world, and we're not out in the streets protesting. You know, if we could put that same pressure and say, we will not tolerate this anymore. We need our military to keep us safe and to do things that are moral in the defense of humanity, not to spread corporations and empire around the world. And if we do that, we can put pressure on and we can bring some of that military budget back where it can do good for us here in the United States.
That's right. Yeah, so Sunrise is out there doing those things. They're going to be trying to nationally host some town halls on the Green New Deal. I'm not sure if we'll end up being part of one of those or not, but there's also, of course, the climate strikes that happened. Kalamazoo students, Western Michigan University students got behind that. Greta von Thunberg, and she's Nobel Peace Prize nominee for that kind of action that you're talking about. That is probably the only thing that will put enough pressure on elected officials to move the needle on this, right?
And I think the genius of the Green New Deal is, again, the way it brings together these interrelated issues that can build constituencies for that broader movement. I mean, Naomi Klein and others have pointed out we have to have a mass social movement if we're going to save the climate, right? But it has to be, but she argues that perhaps the climate is the way to bring together a broader progressive movement, and the Green New Deal follows directly from that kind of an insight. So if we're working on dealing with environmental racism, and in other inequalities, if we're working
Right.
on trying to create good paying jobs for a union and the working folks
Yes.
of our country, if we're trying to invest in infrastructure,
That's
right? These are things that all sort of come together. Saving the climate is important, but it also has all kinds of other cascading benefits. And so hopefully we can create a mass movement that's going to put that pressure on to get us where we need to go.
That's right. You would think with some of the early statements, the infrastructure would be an area politically that there could be some agreement on, and maybe that could be one of the first things that we might actually try under this. But of course, I can't leave without talking about the vote or sham vote or however you want to describe it. Mitch McConnell did bring this resolution to the Senate floor in an attempt to basically put that pressure back on the Democrats, right? And say, they think that that's a losing issue. The Republicans believe that's still a losing issue for Democrats, and they want to put them on the spot, especially moderate Democrats on the spot, and have you on the roll call vote, yes, no for this, so they can continue to use it as an attack mechanism, right? So all Democrats except for 4, I think, ended up voting just present, which is sort of like abstention if you're a Robert's rules kind of person, right? So that they wouldn't have to go on that record, and that they could instead try to make the statement that this vote was only called in order to try to manipulate the process, right?
There were no hearings.
There was not a real.
There was no process
not a
to
real
be followed.
And it's an interesting tactic with the present vote that hasn't been used very often in American politics. So it was interesting to see that. At least mostly unified Democratic response to raising that issue and trying to quell it.
So let's talk about bad faith. McConnell pushed this vote in completely bad faith.
Absolutely.
But the Republican attack on the Green New Deal is also bad faith. And it's filled with lie after lie after lie, distortion after distortion after distortion. They claim that the Green New Deal does this, that, or the other thing, and it does not. I mean, they say it's going to not allow people to fly anymore, that you're not allowed to have no cows.
Right.
I mean, it's just ludicrous, ridiculous, outrageous claims against this that are just out and out lies and distortions about what the bill is really all about.
And that's one of the things that disturbs me the most, is how wrong the information is, and how much it has been adopted by so many people in, I don't just want to blanket say the media, but media and pundits and just the American public believing these false narratives. Right. Who believes that we shouldn't have clean water?
Right.
Infrastructure is water. We have lead pipes, we have PFAS in our water. We're not going to fix that unless we make a massive federal investment to clean up that situation.
That's right.
How can you argue against that? I don't care if you're conservative, moderate, or the most lefty. Clean water, come on, people. And reducing energy costs. Right. Making our communities healthier places to live. Making sure that people have living wage jobs so that they can then go and buy things and spend money and pay taxes and keep the economy running. These are not radical points.
Right.
The Green New Deal is not radical. It really is not. And that is the narrative that we need to be pushing, because moderates should be on board, because this is a positive economic force we should all embrace.
It's a really interesting point, because I think the strategy is to either step up or step aside, and to create some sort of tension or conflict within the Democratic Party and the Democratic base, which unfortunately has become a partisan issue, and that is where the only champions for environment and climate change, I won't say only, but the majority, exist, right? And so here's this attempt to say, this radical thing, and to sort of split that party base. And we are seeing some of that, right? The Nancy Pelosi's, maybe we shouldn't have this committee, just like maybe we shouldn't do impeachment, right? Versus a very progressive left. And one of the things that was interesting when we sort of re-talked about the Green New Deal is I always forget about Markey because it's all about AOC.
Yeah.
And Markey was out there too, and he's the original architect of the 2009 cap and trade legislation that failed, and Pelosi tried to get through. So I'm wondering, if there is sort of a wait, what can we get past versus a sort of grand vision, split in the party. Of course, the Republican folks who want to get elected would love to see that break up the Democratic Party. All of our 2020 Dem presidential candidates, I think, came out in support of the Green New Deal. And then after the vote, now they don't have to talk about that at all. But I don't think that the conservative read on this being an issue that divides and gets less people to turn out is accurate, especially when you look at those numbers from the youth surveys that you were talking about.
And it does seem that there's a pretty broad public support for the Green New Deal.
Yeah, because it's water.
If people really understand it, they support it.
That's right.
And
That's
so
the key.
this
That's
is
it.
why
It's
we have
misinformation.
the Republicans making these clownish, outrageous, reprehensible attacks and to try to distort what's really
right.
in the Green New Deal. Well, who's this Senator Mike Lee?
Oh, yes.
Where's he from? I don't even know where he's from.
Oh.
But he gave one of the most
Yeah.
outrageous, ridiculous, clownish presentations the Congress has
Right.
ever seen. And the Congress has seen a lot of clownish, outrageous,
We've had
reprehensible
snowballs brought in.
I was just
presentations,
thinking
right?
that one too.
But this guy put up,
Yeah.
slide after slide. He totally distorted what the Green New Deal was about. It was just basically, it was one of the most shameful things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
How a United States senator could get up
That's
there and
right.
tell such outrageous lies in an attempt to basically smear the Green New Deal.
Right.
That's what he was trying to do. There was no basis to anything that he said, no
right.
basis, in fact, to anything that he said whatsoever. So to get up on the Senate floor and just tell lie after lie after lie, outrageous lie after outrageous lie,
Yeah.
in an effort, that tells me that the Republicans are scared of the Green New
That's
Deal.
right.
That they do realize that the public supports this, that they really understand what's in it.
Yes.
So that's why we get such a clownish performance, because they're threatened by this, right?
Well, so on that regard, I think one of the things, and this is where Sunrise comes in,
Yeah.
and Sunrise is really aggressively pursuing Democratic elected officials and forcing them on this issue.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who believe that that's a wrong tactic
Right.
because it potentially endangers some Democrats.
Right.
But I have to say that is the right tactic, because if we have a two-party system and one party, the Republicans, are making it clear that there is no power on earth that is going to bring them to the table at this moment,
Right.
then we have to work with the Democrats. And that means we have to force all the people who are our natural allies
That's right.
to get on board. And if that means confrontational and aggressive tactics, to force them to see that this will
Right.
work. That's what we have to do. So we have to put our own house in order first,
Yes.
and then use that to bring broader
Yeah.
pressure.
No, I think they're running a very brilliant strategic campaign, actually. And thank goodness the youth are there to lead us on this. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't put into context the actual bill that does exist, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which it's very interesting politically to see the Green New Deal and all the attention around that, because it's again put out as this trope and there's all this misinformation. But that is, a real reorganization of our society, right? In many ways, the sort of grand vision. Whereas the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, a critique of it might be that it just accepts capitalism as is and works within that. But it does have bipartisan support.
It has some
There
of it,
are Republicans, mostly from Florida. I wonder why they're worried about climate change. And California. Wonder why they're worried about climate change, right? So some Republicans have come out, and there's a bill introduced in the House and Senate. Of course, that is to put a tax fee, goes to amends the IRS code at the point of sale of carbon, be $15 a ton to start with, and go up by $10 every year. And then the dividend part is that money goes back into a fund and gets distributed equally per household, right? So because the idea is, of course, my energy costs will rise, and so how can I do this? But that the market could solve this problem, is where energy innovation and carbon dividend goes, and that's why you see the bipartisan Republican support, right? The argument for years has been, why aren't Republicans, on board with something as basic as clean water and clean air that we originally were, and was not a partisan
Where's
issue.
Pete McCloskey when we need him, right?
And it's money, it's right, but it is also the response to the solutions, right? And where is the free market? Where is small government? Where are those conservative values in something like the Green New Deal? Well, they find them in the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And I was trying to relook up, where is that even going to move? What's going on? Because we're all just paying attention to the Green New Deal, and maybe that's a way to pass the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, is to get everybody yelling about the Green New Deal, and then we pass this over here, which would do some good, right?
Yeah. It makes me a little nervous. To me, it is the pinnacle of neoliberal ideology.
It's economic
it is
capitalism.
believing that the market can save us.
That's right.
And it's not even really a free market, because you're trying to manipulate the market by putting a tax on carbon at the source.
That's right.
And then say that the market is going to solve the problem.
Right.
It's not. At that point, it's not the market. And we've seen from hundreds of years of history that the market isn't going to solve the problem.
Right.
And if you create a situation in which the tax is applied at the source, but then it can be just passed down to the consumer,
Right.
you have therefore eliminated all incentive for the manufacturers to actually do anything different, because it doesn't cost them any money. They just pass that tax along, and then the consumers have to pay more at their end. So.
Yeah.
Anything that moves the needle forward, I will support it.
Great.
But I think that is not going to get us in a much better situation, and it's certainly not going to address the the existential crisis to civilization that's presented by climate change.
Yeah.
Could be a good first step to get us moving and make some positive momentum.
At least it does link reductions with jobs, right? And there is some concern over equity in this idea that, of course, they're going to pass costs on to me as the consumer, but I'm going to get my check in the mail, and that's my individual choice whether I decide to drive my car less, right? But it doesn't. It's a very different, right, sort of value based than something like the Green New Deal and the restructuring that is asking for. And so to me, those two are sort of set up. This is the classic argument. Should we continue a neoliberal economic capitalist approach to this problem, or do we really need to resolve and change some fundamental things about how we
and if it moves us forward, we should support it, but I would hate to see us spend crucial political capital on something that's not really going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
We're still quite a ways away from the 2020 election. But
are we?
It doesn't seem like it. It seems like it's going to happen tomorrow because of all the campaigning, but we're still well over a year away. But unfortunately, presidential campaigns almost don't have any ending at all in American society. But let's talk a little bit about 2020, David, and I want to push you a little bit on who you see out there among that vast array of candidates that would be the best to work on issues like the Green New Deal. Who's supporting it? Who do you think would be in a best position to kind of advance the cause here?
Well, not President Trump. So looking at the other side, I think we have a good field this year. We've got a lot of really good candidates. And I think we always need to think, whenever anybody thinks about who they're going to support, look at who talks about issues. If your candidate's not talking about issues, they're not going to be effective. They're not going to do anything. And don't take apocryphal information. Don't take one story from one person and believe that's the be-all and end-all about a candidate. So take the time to look at the issues and see what the candidates themselves are saying and what they've done. And from that regard, I think I stay where I was with 2016, and I think that the best candidate that's possible for us right now is Senator Sanders. That doesn't mean that there aren't others to support. I think Senator Warren is amazing on the issues, and I hope she gets more support.
Yes.
I also like Mayor Pete.
Yeah.
I really like, he's new on the national political scene, but he's got a good grasp on issues. He's intelligent, and I think he could do a good job as a leader. Somebody who hasn't gotten much press, is not one of the major candidates, as they say, is Representative Gabbard from Hawaii. I don't know if she's signed on to the Green New Deal, but I know that initially she was not ready to because she had introduced into Congress her Off Fossil Fuel Act, which was actually a more aggressive program to get us off of fossil fuels. And that's not to say that the other Democratic candidates aren't as good, but those are the ones I think who offer the best, really dramatic opportunity to change things.
You know, it was interesting, the analysis of some of the different equity and workers' rights in the Green New Deal is sort of a replica of Warren's tax plan. It's sort of, right? It's the Warren tax plan plus the climate change, the infrastructure, and the more the equality issue. So, you know, she probably deserves a little bit more credit for putting that tax plan up on her website. And it's in a readable form. Again, really trying to have some true citizen access
She's
here in all of those
campaigns. She's running a very policy-heavy campaign, which I think we should all appreciate.
Yes.
It would be really great if we had our political campaigns based upon the candidates' policies. I mean, instead of whether or not they stand on top of podiums.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Their personal, you know, stories. Yeah.
So I think the main thing is going to be for us to promote the Green New Deal and to get it to be a centerpiece of the campaign, to really hold candidates' feet to the fire and say, do you support this?
That's right.
And how would you begin to use this framework then to carry out a program that would accomplish the goals of the Green New Deal?
That's right.
And that has to be a centerpiece of the campaign coming up, the debates that are going to be held next summer. And you know, when we get to the convention in Milwaukee, that's got to be front and center there. So we just really need to keep the pressure on the candidates, I think, to do that.
Right, and that's the key. Keep the pressure on the candidates. Whenever you have a chance, ask really pointed questions and make sure that you get answers.
All right, well, we're just about out of time. Wanted to, first of all, again, just let people know about Earth Day coming up, Saturday, April 20th.
From noon to 5.
Downtown Kalamazoo, Bronson Park, from noon until 5, right?
Correct.
And
register your 101,000 active
That's
green.
right.
You've got a year to do it, people.
That's right.
So
Yes.
we won't, you know.
As big or as small as you
I
want.
love this
We
idea
just want
very
people
much.
to do something. That's the key.
get out there and do something, and we hope to see a lot of people down in Bronson Park on Saturday the 20th. And
The Uninhabitable Earth.
yeah,
So,
the David Wallace Wells book, which we put up on screen earlier. It's
can
made it
always-
to the New York Times bestseller list.
right.
Our Climate Change Working Group book club's going to discuss that book
That's right.
next week.
Yep.
And so we hope that people will, I mean, if you really want to get a sense of what's happening with the climate issue, that book's probably one of the best things to start with.
Yes.
And finally, I just want to give a shout out to our great crew behind the scenes.
Yes, absolutely.
Daniel Smith, Larry Mahana, Bob Kilday, all spinning the dials back there and doing such a fantastic job to get us on the air. So we thank you for joining us on Critical Issues Alternative Views, and we invite you to come back again. Thank you.